Hey everybody, thanks for joining me here and thanks for checking out my podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel and click the notification bell for new episodes. You can also find Shine Without Shame on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Well, my guest today is Delara Marchbank. With roots in Chicago, Delara now lives and thrives in Colorado with her husband, 2 adopted children, and an adopted dog. She has over 25 years of experience as an educator, incorporating a wide range of subjects and teaching to a wide range of participants. Currently a full-time homemaker and logistics coordinator for her family, Delara channels her passion for personal transformation and social change into ongoing research and study, community building efforts, social justice education and practicum, and teaching yoga nidra as an applied healing art. In her own words, I have been studying How We Show Up by Mia Birdsong, and in it she writes about advancing her skills as a facilitator and curator of spaces in which others can learn and grow. When I read these words, it was like fireworks in my mind. This is exactly how I would describe my path, my purpose. Delara curates and facilitates educational spaces for adults these days, focusing on the spiritual framework and practical tools necessary for living a purposeful, joyful life centered on justice and unity. Within this purpose, chats over tea and creating art feature prominently. Thanks so much for joining me, Delara.
Thanks, Tiff. I'm really happy to be with you today, even if just virtually.
I know. Yes. I was thinking back to when I first met you. It was when I moved to the Midwest.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was around 2009 or 10. And I attended a women's gathering that you hosted. I think you were hosting them monthly or with some regularity. Anyways, a friend told me about them. She said, you've got to come. Delara's amazing. And it's such a good space for women to come together. And I went to your house and it was like a slumber party, I remember.
I love it. I love it.
And that was my first memory of meeting you. And yes, I was struck by how warm and welcoming you appeared, and definitely in practice you were, and you had this nobility about you. It's like you had this invisible little crown on your head. That's the way I felt.
That's such a sweet reflection. Thank you for that. I'm delighted, and if I remember correctly, I think you became a pretty regular participant. We did do that group monthly. It was great. That was one of the first experiences I had curating and facilitating groups where we're learning together. That's like a perfect example of that. We held that group for about 5 years.
Wow.
So that's it's very special, and I'm so happy that you were part of that chapter of life and future chapters of life.
Yes.
It's pretty cool.
Yes, I also recall a very amazing time with you at a Jamiroquai concert.
Oh, that was so good. That was so good.
That was amazing. Well, again, thanks for joining me and for being open to this conversation. I know you're always open to meaningful topics and discussions, and I thought that you would be the right person to explore maybe a little bit of a different aspect of shame that I haven't explored too deeply on the podcast. And it's the idea of shining without shame, which is of course the name of the podcast, but really I thought about what it would be like if everybody could know themselves well enough to know and acknowledge their gifts, honor those, and utilize those as contributions, right, in the world, and not feel badly about shining and being their best. And I know from personal experience and from witnessing, others, it can be a tricky space to be in, because there is sometimes a sense of competition, right? Or comparing ourselves to someone else. Like, well, they've got it going on and I want to have something going on. Maybe not the same thing, but I want to thrive and, be successful, be prosperous. And it can be easy sometimes, I think, to look at someone else and feel badly, or, that you're maybe not doing as well, seemingly well as them, or the opportunities are not coming to you like they are for another person, or whatever the situations are, it's a strange thing to think that, in my mind, to compare ourselves to other people,
Mm-hmm.
and then maybe to feel badly about our own selves, or to, resent other people for their success. Because to me, it's just strange, because it's like the idea of no two snowflakes are the same. There's no way that I could live someone else's life being myself. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not going to have the same opportunities or the same achievements. I'm going to have my own unique, path, and the same for you and for everybody else. And so I just started to really think about this idea, because it's something I've noticed and I've witnessed for a while. This feeling badly, either as the person who's shining and doing well, or maybe somebody who's comparing themselves to that person. So I thought that
Mm-hmm.
I would explore this a little bit with you, and I think that we can definitely find some fruitful thoughts. And I was curious for you, what does it look like to really shine,
Mm.
to shine from the inside out, and to radiate who you truly are, without having ego, without feeling that you're above anybody else.
Mm-hmm. You know, with with the new arrival of kids in our life, not super new, but it's been a few years now. But it really changes my perspective anyway on this kind of examination or self-reflection. When we think about the way that we raise children altogether, we want them to feel proud of themselves. We want them to feel accomplished. We want them to feel that sense of excellence from the inside out. We nurture it in them. We give them opportunities. We scaffold their learning so that they're not, taking a step that's like five steps ahead, but that they're like going about their process of growing incrementally. We create situations in which they can really practice their skills and learn how to really be accomplished, be excellent in what they do, and feel good about it, right? And if we look at that, to me, like that's the definition, or that's the epitome of what it looks like or feels like to really shine from within. They're not thinking about. I'll take that back. Until a certain age, developmentally, they're not really thinking about how do other people see this. They're not really thinking about how does this compare with other people in my class. They're not really thinking about if I'm really excellent at this, well, what is so and so doing about it, or what does that look like over here? They're just focused on doing what they love to do, and so to me, it's sort of like that's the seed of self-respect, an understanding of one's nobility, um, a recognition of one's radiant spirit, which we all have, without all of the trappings of comparison, contest, competition, and without the constant thinking like, is this good enough, right? I think when those factors come into play, competition, a sense of like, is this good enough, then we start to see the complications. And sometimes that happens in our lives because shame factors in, because somebody is shaming us for being who we are. I think back to growing up, as a kid in the 80s. That totally ages me. That's fine. Um, for example, being gay, being openly gay particularly, was not an okay thing for kids when I was a kid. And so I think about boys that may have been in my class, or girls that may have been in my class, and what would it have looked like for them to just be themselves without any of the overlay of like, you can't wear that, you're a boy, or you can't participate in sports, you're a girl, or that's not very ladylike, or just buck up and be a man. Like all those things that we think about, in the world of like gender identity. All of those things were ways that one's inner shine was squelched or dampened in some kind of way.
Mm-hmm.
So when we remove all of those things, and if we had allowed those precious, beautiful souls, who are my classmates or my friends, in my childhood, If we had just allowed them to be who they are, that would have been an example of like allowing one to shine from within, without apology, without question, without any kind of, is this good enough? Like that conversation wouldn't even come into play. And so I think the same is true for us as adults. It's really about reclaiming that sense of who we are. So there's a process of discovering or rediscovering who we are. And part of that process is removing some of the scripting that we've been given, whether it's by family or by culture, or even by like what we thought we wanted in our life, like what we thought we value. Sometimes that can create a script for us that we just follow without question. But when we pause to think, is this really what I want, or is this really me? Does this really feel like me? I wonder what would emerge from that question or from that inquiry, and if it would look like what it was we thought it might be.
Oh, that's interesting. Yes, the scripting gets in the way. And as you were saying that, I thought, oh, that's right. Could we just remove that? That would eliminate so many barriers and veils. And then I was thinking, oh, but what is it that people need? I guess it's support, but I'm wondering, like, what do people need to have in their lives so that they could say, okay, I'll remove the past, and maybe the past being like whatever my parents or grandparents learned to be true, or what they thought, what they held as valuable. Okay, maybe that's not valuable to me anymore. Maybe some of it is, but maybe some of it isn't, and it's like, okay, if you're going to get rid of that, or remove, some of that, that thinking and that mentality, what do you need to replace? What do you need in place so that you can take those steps? And because sometimes when you do, remove that script, or maybe another way of saying it is let go of that past or that history, you may be the first person to do that, or it can, even if you're not, maybe, you're still on your own unique path. And that I know we both in our own ways, I think have taken our own new paths, maybe that weren't similar or exactly the same as our parents. So we know what that is like. I'm just wondering for people who think, okay, that sounds cool, but how do I do this on my own? Or, do I have to find like a therapist, or do I have, I'm just curious what your thoughts are. I'm just reflecting.
Yeah. Everyone's path is totally different. That, I know that. I think some of it happens to us. Like we find ourselves in situations where something we may have hoped for doesn't come to be. As an example, I'll use my personal life as an example. My husband and I, really wanted to have biological kids initially. We envisioned ourselves as a family, growing into a family, having children. And it's something that we pursued, even though it was challenging for a period of time. And then we came to a decision point where we had to decide, like, are we going to go farther on this path, or are we going to pause here and really rethink what creating a family could look like? Might it look a little different than what we thought it might be, and those were difficult conversations. Those were difficult times. It wasn't a quick and easy, like, oh yeah, let's just adopt kids, or, you know what I mean? So it wasn't, so I don't, I really want to emphasize, there's no quick fix. There's no, it is a journey. It is a path of constant inquiry, checking in with each other. But it starts with the willingness. And so this is what I would say for any of us, maybe. I think it needs to start with a willingness to let go in some way, let go of something. Whether it's letting go of an idea, or letting go of a value or a cultural practice, or a hurt. Sometimes it involves letting go of a hurt that we have felt, that maybe because it's unresolved still, Maybe it needs to find resolution. Maybe we need to really like examine it and say, like, what are you giving to me in my life anymore? Like, what is this relationship, you know? Um,
Mm.
and that can take years. Maybe it does take therapy. Maybe it doesn't take therapy. But I think the willingness has to be there first, the willingness to let go. I mean, we live in a time, look, this whole pandemic business, um, I think what it has highlighted for me, first and foremost, is how attached we all are to whatever, to the way school should look, to the way businesses should run, to the way, to the way we should be treating each other or not. That to me has been like the most poignant and clear emergence in terms of like an understanding, like, wow, we are all very attached to a lot of different things, you know? And so the inquiry maybe needs to begin with, what are we willing to let go of? And then, then it takes a lot of different forms or paths, or, then I think it goes in a lot of different ways. What has been very instructive for me that I can share is within my study of yoga as a philosophy and also as an applied spiritual path, as a teacher of yoga of many different styles, something emerged from my learning that was really critical for me, and it helped reframe a lot of the struggles that I had in life about being my true self, basically. And it was this question, or it was this framing of who would I be if I could tolerate every consequence of my actions? So the teaching that was presented to me was this phrase or this quote that I saw on a wall at Kripalu Yoga Center in Western Massachusetts. It was, yoga is the practice of tolerating the consequences of being your true self. Yoga is the practice of tolerating the consequences of being your true self. And so how I have taken that to mean for myself is I define yoga in that context as like a state of being in wholeness, or a practice of moving toward wholeness, oneness. And so that reality, being in oneness, being in wholeness, is an ongoing practice of tolerating the consequences of being my true self. And so how that shows up in my everyday life might be, okay, I am feeling like I don't want to go to my family's Thanksgiving gathering this year. Okay, I'm just using sort of, I mean, it's kind of hypothetical, but also it's something that I think I've like worked through over the past few years. I've come to a different understanding about what Thanksgiving means as a holiday, how it functions in our society, what it means to different groups of people. I don't really like celebrating it as the way that we have traditionally celebrated it as a culture in America. I don't begrudge anybody for wanting to celebrate it that way, but for me, it doesn't work in the way that it always has been. Plus, quite frankly, cooking a turkey for so many hours during the day feels like such a monumental waste of my time. Okay, but anyway, so all of that aside.
Yeah.
So now I am being invited to my family's home, my in-laws or my mom, or whoever it is inviting me. What do I do with that? Okay, if I'm being my true self, if I'm honoring what is important to me, which is teaching my children a different understanding, a different story about Thanksgiving than maybe what I grew up with, a version of the story that is more aligned with the reality of how our Indigenous brothers and sisters experienced the colonization of their lands. So if I'm wanting that to be my children's experience, to be my experience, then it does not look like going over to my family's home and participating in this day-long like food fest. Okay, it looks instead like ordering pizza and putting on a documentary and learning about the true history of the land that we live on, and being with, maybe inviting friends, non-pandemic times, inviting friends to come and share that time with us and share stories. Maybe it looks like focusing more on gratitude. And as I have begun to do that over the years, it feels like a shining from within. It feels like a radiance that's not coming from anything negative. Like, in other words, it's not a I don't want to do that. I'm not trying to push something away. I respect, like everyone has a different take on this holiday. That's cool. My take though is this, and this comes from values and from spirit and from what's important to me and comes from the ethos of our family unit, something that my husband and I really try hard to pass on to our kids in some kind of way. And so then tolerating the consequence of being that true self may be a process of handling my family's disappointment that we're not showing up, or it may look like having to explain this to people, or it may look like so there are a lot of things that are like the therefore. I make this decision, therefore these things come into being. And so tolerating the consequences with each step is sort of like, am I okay with disappointing my family? Can I manage that? Can I hold that? Do I have capacity for that? If I don't, then I need to make a different choice. Right? And if I do, then it shows me, like, that feels like a confirmation. It feels like an opening to possibility in terms of being who I see myself or who I would like to be in the world around me. So that's a really pivotal teaching. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And the example you shared about being clear what's important to you and your family, and then making the decisions about how you're going to spend your time and your energy based on that value, maybe a newer an enhanced value that maybe you didn't have when you were 10 years old. That's really powerful. And it to hear you talk about how it was like a in this example, hypothetical or not, there's a confirmation. There's something inside you that says, well, because I consciously made this choice, and maybe it consulted with other people, or, I a lot of energy and thought and care went into this decision, and the decision, has ramifications, but what I heard you say was I can accept the ramifications if this is a decision that I value. Knowing, and when you get to a certain age in life, you sort of know, especially if it's family members, but even not, you kind of know how humans are going to respond to certain circumstances. It's just, you start to see the patterns of maybe when people aren't as conscious as they could be in and mindful in their lives about how they respond and react. You sort of start to know, I have a feeling I can probably expect this, especially if it's family members, but even sometimes not others. It does start to cultivate kind of a new I feel like a new reality. It's like the reality was already inside, but you allowed some more space to kind of let that reality breathe and live. And it's like, oh, that's quite an empowering process. I mean, I've experienced it myself with different circumstances, but I really appreciated the way you articulated yours, and how that yoga teaching and practice gave you that clarity, for how you can live your life,
and then
being
again,
honest and truthful.
Yeah, exactly. And then again, it begins with a willingness to let go, right? So it needed to begin with my willingness to let go of the way that our family had typically done it before, or the way that our culture does it even still today. So that willingness to let go, and then exploring what are the possible paths, and so, like, if I go this way, can I tolerate the results of making this choice? And so that's a very macro example. I think it can happen on a daily basis too, in a very micro kind of way. I have sort of an unspoken and sometimes spoken agreement with, friends who are in my immediate orbit of daily life here, that we make plans, and sometimes we have to cancel those plans. And, like, no judgment, no story, no, like, you don't have to tell me why. It is all good. There's such a trust and love, but again, like, that's a really different like that took a lot of letting go, because there's a part of me that's like, oh, I feel so bad that I have to cancel these plans, and so I need to explain why, and I go into this lengthy paragraph of like, this and this and this and this and this, and it's like, really, does that matter at the end of the day? I don't know. I love you. I'm not canceling because I hate you or because like you're not important to me today. But so like that's a micro example of like, I can tolerate, knowing that maybe my friend is going to be disappointed in this moment that we're not getting together, or we're not able to go for a walk or whatever. That's something that I can tolerate for the purpose of like, in this moment, it is a no, and I need to shift gears and do something different with the time, even though we said we were getting together.
Yes. And at the core of what you're saying, for me, I think about some qualities like mutuality, reciprocity, respect for sure, uh, cooperation. I, don't you find, and it sounds like in this situation, this was, or in what you described with these friends, this dynamic is probably the reality. But don't you find that when you have a conversation with a friend, a colleague, a family member, and you just speak openly and honestly, here's what I need, or here's
Mm-hmm.
what's going on in my life,
Mm-hmm.
and you get an understanding, a mutual understanding, an acknowledgement of what our reality is, in our day-to-day lives. When Don't you find that when there's that mutual understanding, it's so much easier to get past those little, bumps or obstacles when
Mm-hmm.
we have to cancel, or we have to change our plans, or we can't, stay committed to something. When you've given somebody an idea of maybe what's going on and like a little bit of a heads up, doesn't it seem to make things so much easier? Because there can always be misunderstanding, but there's been a communication.
Mm-hmm.
There's been an honest discussion about what I'm dealing with in life, what you're dealing with, and it allows for, I find, a deeper sense of respect for each
Mm-hmm.
other, which makes things so much easier. Do you agree?
I do. I will qualify it by saying I have experienced that some of the time. So I do agree that when we make a heart-to-heart connection and we come to somebody with our truth, and we're honest and we're heartfelt and sincere in sharing why we can or cannot continue to do whatever it is we might, whatever the situation is. I think where there is that reciprocity, where there is a relationship and an understanding, where there is compassion, yes, that is 100% true. But I've also experienced it in my life, and I'm thinking of a particular situation, but also like I think there have been some mini, events or occurrences where I've seen this again. Um, the other party doesn't always, we all are operating from our own baggage and also from our own pressures and values, okay? And so I'm thinking of a specific time, and without getting into all the details, but again, just using a personal example, I had committed to a work project, a consulting project, during a time in my life that was a little turbulent. And um, I got to a point where physically I was unable to complete my end of or my part of the project, my contribution to the project. And like I was having back pain in a way that just prevented me from completing the task as it was in front of me. And I knew exactly why I was having the back pain, and there were emotional things happening as well as physical things happening. And so I shared this with the person to whom I was accountable for this project, very honestly, very sincerely, with extreme humility, with like above and beyond, in my opinion, generosity, in terms of like, I know I have been prepaid for some of this work. I'm giving you back all of that money. I'm even giving you back some extra because I just feel badly that I can't complete, my part of this. There was such a complete lack of understanding on their part that it became a source of pain that then, boy, it echoed back to me. Like there were there were people who were involved in that project that then I saw again in another work, on another project, who, and this was like, so I was in my 30s at this point. I felt like I was back in high school. There was like shade, like nobody's business. I mean, like sitting in a room of other people, who were hired for this new project. And one of the people who was part of that original one kind of like giving me the cold shoulder, literally and figuratively. So it was just like, what is happening? And I approached that person during a break and I said, hey, like, I've always enjoyed a really good professional relationship with you, but I'm feeling like there's some tension. Is there something I need to make amends for? Or like, is there something we need to talk about? And, like that, what came back at me was just like a flat out, like, you quit on that project and it created all kinds of work for me. And I wasn't even paid what my time was worth, and, all this like stuff. And it was, so it was clear to me that there was not that understanding, Tiffany.
I hear that. I hear that. And I think what I was trying to encourage in
Yeah.
my question was
Yeah.
then that person should have also shared.
Totally.
That's what I'm talking about, true
Okay. I see what you're
mutuality.
saying.
I'm
I
talking
see what
about,
you're saying.
so I'm not saying it's an easy thing to do,
Yeah.
but when it does happen, it's so beautiful. Everybody gets their needs met. Everybody
Yes.
gets to share what's on their heart. And
Yes.
that person, for whatever, because I know you, and of
Yeah.
course, none of us are perfect, but I
Right.
imagine you would have been willing to hear what
Oh,
that person needed to
completely.
say. So
Totally.
that was an unfortunate situation, and that
Yeah.
person didn't step up to
Yes.
be the best they could have been. I'm sure
Right.
they're capable of it, but they didn't step up. And that's
Yeah.
what I think I'm asking, because I'm trying to also encourage, isn't that an
Yeah.
amazing
Yeah.
paradigm if we can both parties, all four people, all five, whoever's involved, everybody can mutually share their
Mm.
concerns, their
Mm-hmm.
desires, their needs. Whew,
Mm-hmm.
so much easier.
Yeah.
So
Total.
you were the
Yes.
only one, I don't want to belabor it, but, and I know it's complicated and other people have their, perspectives and their views. And I don't know this,
Sure.
I'm not
Yeah.
aware of who this other
Yeah.
person is, but
Yeah.
you were a person you were able to, show up and share. And it would have been so much, so much more fruitful and beneficial had that person done the same. And for whatever reason,
Yes.
they didn't, or maybe they
Yeah.
couldn't in that moment in their
Yeah.
lives. Maybe they're able to do it now. That's what I'm talking about. It just makes things
Totally.
so much easier.
I
I
agree.
found that in other situations myself, or like when maybe you have a position of authority and you're working with people, or, people are looking to you to kind of guide and set the
Mm-hmm.
tone and create the environment. And when you're honest and open about, okay, folks, here's what we're involved in. There's going to be times where it's going to get challenging. There's going to be times where we're going to want to snap at each other. Whatever, however the reality is articulated, people feel so much better when they know, oh, okay, I can expect, okay, it may not be roses, but um, we're all kind of on the same page about we're
Mm-hmm.
in this together, and we've talked through some of the potential challenges. Nobody has to be afraid to kind of, deal with them. Anyways, I just find it makes things so much better, but it's so
Mm-hmm.
hard. It can be hard for everyone to be
Mm-hmm.
on the same page and step up and share.
So what I hear you saying, both in the question and then in the clarification, and thank you for sharing that. And, um, you know, yes, that 100%. What I heard as you clarified was a piece about vulnerability, was a willingness to be vulnerable, because I think that's when we are coming into a reciprocal, true cooperative relationship, then everybody is willing to be somewhat vulnerable. Not vulnerable as in welcoming pain, but vulnerable as in like, here I am, here is what I
Mm-hmm.
need, here are my thoughts. In a way, it's sort of like allowing a certain amount of shining from within as well.
Absolutely.
Like showing up as your true self in that scenario, but everybody showing up as their true self in that scenario, and agreeing that that's the requirement. Um, in in uh, in your gracious intro, you mentioned, because I had mentioned it to you, that I've been reading this book, How We Show Up by Mia Birdsong. It is a spectacular book. I want to just say, like, if anyone has interest in community building, understanding group dynamics, rethinking family values, having a reframe of what we typically think of as quote unquote the American dream. It is a phenomenal book. I like I just cannot say enough how profound the ideas are within that text. So this particular thing that we're talking about is something that she also writes about, which is like being really explicit with the person with whom you are having a relationship, whatever that relationship is, whether personal or professional or what have you. But being really explicit about the parameters of the relationship, the requirements, the needs, so that there is an open, clear understanding and a mutuality from which whatever needs to happen can emerge graciously, naturally, almost effortlessly.
I like that. I've added it to my list mentally.
Okay, cool.
And I hope others check it out. Yes. Also, Delara, I've wondered for you. I know you've given some examples, family life and professional life. When it comes to friendships or relationships, because that's something that certainly all of us can relate to, what have you done? What have you explored on your journey of coming into your own, honoring who you are, respecting your abilities, your gifts, and being okay, even, if there are days where you don't feel so okay about them, but being okay with who you are and knowing what you have to contribute to the world as you've gone through that journey, on that road of getting clear about who you are. What have you done in terms of the people in your life, the friends maybe in your life? What have you done about making sure you kind of are around the kind of people who honor who you are and are like, okay, yeah, Delara, that's great. Have you had to consciously say, okay, that person isn't able to support me, or maybe I want to try to cultivate, a new aspect of our relationship so that we can mutually support each other? Like, what has been your process when it comes to being conscious about who's in your life and who you let into your life and maybe who you let go of? Like, not that we need to get into specific people, but
of course, yeah.
In terms of the process for you, what has that looked like? Does that make sense what I'm asking?
Yeah, yeah. Um, so I would say, um, sort of circling back to the original question about what does it look like to shine from within without, like being in competition and getting all caught up in all of that. We talked about, a willingness to let something go. We talked about a willingness to tolerate the consequences of our actions and being our true self. And then I would also say another required piece is being witnessed, being around people who really see you for who you are and whom you really see for who they are. So again, that mutuality, because in any kind of relationship, if it's only flowing one way, it's bound to have a limitation at some point. But that cooperation and reciprocity helps to magnify and amplify the gifts and the beauty and the radiance, all the way around. So I have been very blessed to have amazing friends who do see me for who I am. And when there is any question, or when, like that isn't to say there hasn't been conflict or there hasn't been question about, like, well, why didn't Delara, come to my wedding or whatever. That's, again, hypothetical. Just kind of like giving an example. There is an understanding and agreement that we can have a conversation around it. I will also say that at the same time that all of my friendships really feel like a blessing, I also really want my friends to challenge me. I welcome in my relationships, in my very close, intimate relationships, I welcome a challenging question around, so I've heard you say, Delara, for example, that you want to, I don't know, I'm trying to think of an example, but whatever, like XYZ goal. You know, how's that going? What are you doing around that? That's what I mean by challenge. Like not so much like a direct, finger wagging kind of
Mm-hmm.
experience, but more like I've heard you talk about this is important to you. How are you supporting that? Or celebrating, like I see that you said such and such was important to you. For example, like eliminating, let's say, wheat and sugar from your diet. That's important to you. And look at that. You've done that for like 4 months. That's amazing, So that encouragement and also the like awareness of each other's goals or each other's
Mm.
visions and supporting it both in the way of celebrating successes, but also in the way of like encouraging or lovingly nudging when that has been requested, to
Mm.
challenge us to grow in ways that maybe we tend to shy away from because it's uncomfortable.
That's so practical, though. That's what I love about what you just shared, specifically about, friends and friendships and maintaining healthy friendships. It's, you've distilled it down to some thoughts and some actions that are so practical. They're not overcomplicated. It's just the basics of what
Mm-hmm.
it really takes to maintain vital relationships, healthy
Mm-hmm.
relationships. And I so appreciate how simple, not that it's always easy in action, but just in terms of the framework, it's simple to me.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea of witnessing is really important and that it's mutual. That really strikes me as an important aspect
Mm-hmm.
in cultivating and maintaining those healthy friendships, relationships, knowing each other's goals, and encouraging and celebrating. Yeah, that's I think that's what's needed.
Mm-hmm.
And um well, I for some reason I during our conversation I keep thinking of younger people, maybe teenagers or those who are about to enter young adulthood, and I just think, "Oh, what and when I was that age, like what would have what kind of conversations, what kind of people surrounding me would have really helped me to thrive
Mm-hmm.
and feel supported and loved and welcomed." I'm really thinking about how can I help, and how can we all help encourage younger people, and how can
Mm-hmm.
we help people find the tools and also just help think through what's really important and maybe what you don't need to spin your wheels on, in
Mm-hmm.
terms of thriving and again having healthy relationships. I think back to when we were little kids, and I'm going to assume that this was similar because I've heard so many young people talk about this. Maybe it's still a reality when you're, especially for little girls,
Mm-hmm.
you have your like list of who your best friend is, who your good friend is, who your friend is. I mean, there's like a
Mm-hmm.
weekly
Yeah.
assessment of who
Yeah.
your friends are, and if they've wronged you, then they slip down on the list or fall off. And I'm just curious for children, what and for you, what has been your experience with exploring this topic of healthy
Mm-hmm.
friendships and challenges, and
Yeah.
I'm just curious.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, speaking to the first part of what you were asking, which was what I was hearing you asking about, was about um, like both passing it down, but also benefiting from those who have come before us. There's a lot of value, I think, to having a wide range of ages of friends, particularly as an adult, but also as a kid. And I feel really lucky that we had a lot of family friends whose children were much older than me. Much older, I mean, again, so it's relative. So, like, when I was 8, they were 16, 17. Like, that's
Mm.
a very different life experience. So,
Yes.
even though now as adults, that 8 years is like nothing. But, in my childhood, having friends who were 8, 10 years older than me was really valuable because they helped guide my way a lot of the time, or they were people I could look up to, or see how they live their life and model my decisions after them. So that's something that I think is really important just generally. The more that we can surround ourselves with a wide diversity of people in many different ways, I think the more it enriches our life in ways that we don't really imagine. And then in terms of like what we talk about with our children about friendship and how you choose a friend, what it means to be a good friend, and they are very explicit conversations that we have with our children. We really focus a lot on the inner qualities because I find we live in such a material and physically oriented world, that it's easy to slip into patterns of thinking that have to do with who a friend is on the outside. In other words, do we have the same interests? Do we like the same color? Do we like the same books? Do we listen to the same music? Like all of those are great and fine. And they're exciting when you meet somebody who likes something that you like. But really the more important qualities or questions I think about, is this a good friend? Are they honest? Do they make you feel good about who you are when you spend time with them? Do they support you in your preferences and your choices and your likes? You know, we've always talked with our kids about the fact that you don't have to like all the same things, but you do need to support each other in your likes. So our daughter, for example, is really into nature and particularly bugs and birds, and she talks about wanting to be an entomologist or an ornithologist, which is not typical for the average 11-year-old girl or child in general, you know. So, but she loves it and she owns it. And so we've talked about how it doesn't, you know, like when in your friendships, it doesn't really matter if your friends love bugs as much as you do, but it does matter, for example, are they squashing a spider in front of you, right? Or are they like aware, like, ooh, you know, she probably wouldn't really like that if I did that. So maybe there's a different way I can do it. You know, are they coming to you with questions that they have to help you share your knowledge? These are all the kinds of things that we feel are important in friendships as they're developing in childhood, but then also again, you know, as adults. It's the same thing. Like I don't expect all my adult friends to have this, like listen to the same music and have the same interests. It's wonderful when our paths of service overlap. That's a really great feeling to be able to engage in things together. But it's more about supporting each other in our interests and goals, and that's something that we help the kids understand as well. That you're really looking to develop friendships based on what's on the inside, not only what's on the outside.
Okay, yes. That seems quite wise. I like that. I like that.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that was something that was explicitly taught to me when I
Yeah,
was a
definitely
child.
wasn't for me.
Hmm. I don't
I
think it
mean,
was for me.
my mom definitely distinguished between like I don't mind you being friends with this person, but I don't want you to be friends with that person. Like those were conversations that I had with my mom, and she never really gave
Mm.
reasons. Not that she had
Ah,
to, but
yeah.
you know, like, and maybe it just came from her intuition, and so then you know, it's not like she had to give me a reason, but it wasn't a conversation that helped me develop a pattern that I could then replicate when choosing other friends in the future, right?
I see.
That's what I'm interested in making sure that our kids have is some
Hmm.
kind of language, some kind of metrics, you know, like a rubric, if you will. This friend gets 5 points if they're honest, if they make me feel good about myself, and if they support me in my interests. Okay, that is a big check.
Yes.
This friend
Okay.
does not become my friend if they, you know, if they do X, Y, and Z. Like having that kind of a system,
Mm. Hmm.
you know.
Seems so useful. Yes. I like that. Well, I also wanted to ask about your thoughts on becoming clear about what we have to offer,
Mm.
genuinely what we have to give to the world in small ways, in bigger ways, and how ego doesn't need to be a part of that. And it's, in my opinion, best that it's not. But curious what you've thought about or what you've experienced in this regard.
Hmm. Yeah, that's such a great question. again, I feel like because we live in such a material and materially oriented world, it's really hard for us as spiritual beings to find our bearings sometimes. you know,
Mm-hmm.
um, the ego can be a challenge. It can be a challenge when our own ego shows up in big ways. It can be a challenge when another person's ego shows up in big ways. Um, there again, like I look to the yoga community often for great examples of what to do and what not to do. And maybe they're like in the media, I think there's a lot more of what not to do. These examples of like people who have made tremendous contributions, or have a wonderful way of thinking about the world, approaching the world, but then they abuse that power. They sort of take on the persona of like patriarchal power, basically, and they abuse people emotionally, physically, sexually. Um, like it doesn't take much to look in the media to find stories like that. So there's a lot. So like that's the what not to do is
Mm.
like, yes, show up as who you are and feel again, like from that childlike, joyful place. Feel that pride in what you have to offer. Feel proud of yourself. Feel excited, etc. But um, recognize that it's something that's coming through you and not from you. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's sort of like a framing that I think is really helpful. Is that anything? Yeah? You were going to say something. I didn't want to cut you off.
No, no, I wasn't. No,
Yeah,
no,
okay.
I just kind of opened my mouth like,
Yeah.
yes.
um, yeah, like what I have to offer, it's coming through me. So it has my flavor, it has my uh, my personal twist on it, but it's
Mm-hmm.
not of me. It's not from me. Like I didn't generate it necessarily. It's coming from the divine, if we want to say, or from God, or from like whatever the framework is that we want to think about that. But it's definitely something that I'm tapping into, that I'm offering through me, in service of others. So that's the other piece of it that I think, like recognizing where it comes from for us, and also recognizing for whom it is. And being of service to others, P.S., doesn't mean that it cannot be materially sustaining for me as well.
Right,
Right?
right.
Those are not mutually exclusive.
That's right.
In fact, I feel like when we are in touch with what really lights us up, what we feel excited about, what we feel joyful about, the ways in which we can allow energy to move through us in service to others, um, almost not 100% of the time for sure, because there are definitely in our world framework there are kinds of work that are vastly undervalued, monetarily speaking. um, but I feel like the material prosperity comes with the spiritual prosperity, that when we
Mm-hmm.
feel that sense of joyfulness in what we're doing and who we're being and the way that we're showing up in the world, I feel like the world then reflects back to us that joyfulness and that abundance and that prosperity, in both spiritual and material ways.
It's so elegant. I like it how you articulated that. Yeah, it is. It's an interesting era when I think about our values collectively as a society. Material still reigns, and in my own belief system, there's nothing wrong with material. We have to have material goods
Yep.
to be here.
Yep.
Otherwise, we're not really going to be able to do much. So just want to be clear for myself, like there's no puritanism that's going on here. It's
Yeah.
it's really, and I like how you said it. I mean, it's one, the spiritual, the material, they feed each other, but it seems to be that there has to be something that connects, that you're connected to, that doesn't require your ego. If you want to have longevity,
Mm-hmm.
if you want to have longevity in your success and your prosperity, I don't think ego can get you that far.
Mm-hmm.
It can take you some places, it'll open some doors, but it's it's not it's not the good fuel that's really going to take you all the way, whatever that looks like for each individual, it's got to be
Mm-hmm.
connected to something greater. And right, whether it's God or whether it's just having some sort of, connection to what feels like a higher purpose, power, whatever it is, I think that people are going to need to, if they haven't already, to explore this idea. But I really think specifically the idea of what's going to take you the furthest,
Mm-hmm.
farthest, furthest. One has to do with distance, one has to do with time. Furthest, is that it?
Both.
Um, there we go. I think that, in other words, it's not about, I personally don't need to impose my belief system, my religious beliefs or spiritual practices onto anybody. They're mine, and I do with them what I need to.
Mm-hmm.
But for those who don't maybe have those tools or resources that they tap into for whatever their reasons, no judgment.
Right.
But I do think people are going to have to start taking closer looks at what are the tools that are really going to help me sustain what I
Right.
need, and know that there are tools that will help you sustain
Right.
what you need to do in life, what you're called to do, giving your gifts and offering them to the world. There are resources and tools that help us for something that's long lasting,
Yeah.
a lot easier. I mean, it takes work, but it's much easier in my mind in the long run, as opposed to just holding on to, like, yeah, if it's ego, if it's like charisma, but the charisma in the not so like nice
Mm-hmm.
sense, or that like dominating.
Like manipulative charisma. Yeah.
Yeah, there we go. Or that, that dominating, just kind of vicious competition.
Mm.
It's like that. I just I think that for those who are for those who have that as their kind of their framework or their system that they draw on, I think it's worth asking ourselves, what is it though that what I'm doing, is it really self-sustaining? And is it, contributing?
Mm-hmm.
Do I feel good about what I'm doing and
Mm-hmm.
my day-to-day contributions and how I'm making those contributions? I guess they're not easy questions to ask. And I think if you are attached to just material goods and you keep getting the material goods, then I guess you probably wouldn't necessarily be inclined to ask
Mm-hmm.
other questions about
Mm-hmm.
your life and your values. But I do want to put out there that I think you can expect to find ways to have a much more powerfully sustained life. But it does require each person to ask, some questions and to
Mm-hmm.
explore. And I don't think the ego will give you all the answers or take you all the way.
Mm-hmm.
It's just real time thoughts.
I agree with that, Tiffany. No, I feel like that's really insightful. So I want to just kind of amplify what you're saying or what I
Mm,
hear you saying, which is that the sustainable path, the path that has longevity, that is sustainable, that is fruitful over a long period of time, cannot come from ego. That ego is sort of like a short burning hot flame. It's like it's quick and it's here and then it's gone. Sort of
hmm.
that idea of like the 15 minutes of fame, right?
Yes.
Like it's great in the moment when it's there and then it's not there. So if you're
Yes.
looking to rely on that for the long game, it's not a winning strategy. Rather, what I hear you saying is that when we are focused more on and so like tangential to that but also like highlighting. So ego is about me, myself, and I.
Hmm.
It's not a cooperative framework. It's not a reciprocal framework. It is it's a self-involved, self-feeding framework, right? And so that it's limited in a way. It's sort of like a closed system. There's nothing
Hmm.
coming in and nothing going out. Whereas when we look more toward reciprocity and cooperation, that's an open system where there's lots flowing in and there's a lot flowing out. And so there's like an abundance that automatically comes with that.
Yes, Delara, which also to me speaks to the question of what does, why do people feel competitive?
Mm.
And I think it has to do with
Mm-hmm.
scarcity complex, which definitely runs rampant in our society. I mean, there's material goods that are scarce, but in terms of opportunities for success, for achievement, to thrive, I think that collectively we believe that not there's not enough for everybody, even
Mm-hmm.
in the, again, the opportunities, which are kind of partially material related, but there is something else, another quality about opportunities and success. There's a different layer to what we tap into
Mm-hmm.
when we do succeed. And I think that there is a belief that there's not enough
Mm-hmm.
opportunity, there's not enough, just XYZ, fill in the blank, whatever concept or idea you want to put in there. I think that that partly contributes to why people are competitive. There are other
Mm-hmm.
reasons, of course. Sometimes it's just what you've inherited as a belief system,
Mm-hmm.
but this idea that, well, if that person's shining, if they have this opportunity, well, how am I? And maybe I don't feel that I have that an opportunity that's presenting itself. Well, then what?
Right.
Where do I get my opportunity? And it's like the opportunities, they're not like apples on trees.
Mm-hmm.
There's something a little bit more ethereal, or something, they manifest. Sorry to
Mm-hmm.
use the new age word, peeps, but that's the best way I can say it. They manifest based on how, what we believe about ourselves, the action we
Mm-hmm.
take, the intentions we have, the motives we have. And so, yeah, this idea that there's not enough for me, I better get mine.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a false premise.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I understand why it exists. But to your point about cooperation, and I had a conversation a few months ago with some good friends about that quality, cooperation. And one person astutely said, it's not it's not about each person getting their 15 minutes of fame. When everybody cooperates, which means everybody gives their, you know, offers, makes their contribution
Mm-hmm.
for the common good, and gets to show up as themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody, it's a win-win-win all around, and it's not 15 minutes of fame. This
Mm-hmm.
person said it's just never-ending fame for
Mm-hmm.
everybody,
Mm-hmm.
not for a few. That's a really different way of looking at the world, and I think also exploring the idea of cooperation. And
Mm.
I think that's something I too want to encourage and promote, is that there's enough for everybody here.
Yeah.
Again, materially, we're recognizing there's some challenges, but we also, I'm sure, have the solutions. We just have to figure those out. But in terms of opportunities, there's enough.
Yeah.
But again, it's not like picking an apple off the tree. I don't think it's so straightforward always. Sometimes opportunities land in our laps, but sometimes we have to cultivate them.
Yeah,
And I think we
absolutely.
need to know what, we need to get clearer individually about what it looks like on an individual level to cultivate my success.
Yeah.
And I know that could be a whole other conversation, but I was tying it back into, you're right, what you shared, the thought about cooperation and competition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I love the widening perspective that you offered there. That's really powerful. There was a story that a friend shared with me once, and forgive me, I don't remember the source, but to me it was a great illustration of how when we are in a mode of cooperation, there is always enough. So a family wanted to have dinner, and they planned to make a meal. They realized that they were missing one ingredient, and so they sent the boy across the hall to ask if their neighbor had that one ingredient. And then when the boy came back, he had, let's say it was eggs. Like he had the eggs with him, and then said to his, mother, and I also invited them to come join us for dinner. And then she had this like panicky moment, like, oh no, we're not going to have enough food. And then come to find out that they had then invited other neighbors to come, and they had then in turn invited other neighbors. And so it turned out that like this whole floor of people was getting together for dinner. But what happened was, as each family came, they brought something else to share, so that by the end of the meal, everybody had enough of something,
Yes.
because everybody was bringing their part. So you were saying, like, when we all show up as our true selves, when we bring what it is that we have to offer, we enrich the spaces where we're coming together, because we're all bringing something, and so then the abundance multiplies. Just made me think of that as like a very concrete way of experiencing that. I also think there's another visual that came to mind as you were sharing that, and it had to do with like, like if we imagine, if we're looking into our container, if we're looking like, what do I have in my hands? And then I look over to see what you have in your hands, and I look over to see what they have in their hands. It feels like a very limited way of seeing what's actually there. Versus if I'm looking up, like I'm trying to catch water. I'm looking up and I see the sky is raining, is pouring down. All I see is the abundance. So it's sort of like when we only focus on our own capacity, or like again, it's that, I think that's a subtle way that ego can show up, right? Is when we're only focusing on our own container, our own capacity, then we miss the abundance that is coming toward us at any given time in the middle of the rainstorm.
Yes. Well, do you have anything else you want to add before I wrap it up, Delara?
I don't know. I think that feels good. I love this topic. I love that you're exploring these themes of how shame can factor into our lives, how we can learn to shine from within, practice that, be around other people who reflect that radiance back to us and who see us for who we are. It's not an easy path for sure, but I feel like it's just so fulfilling and juicy and beautiful, beautiful.
As always, you connected all the dots, Delara. That was beautiful.
I
Well,
enjoy talking with you, Tiff.
likewise. Thank you. And I always end, Delara, by asking my guest, which television show, new or old, would you recommend and why?
That's such a great question. Oh, that's so tricky depending on what you like to watch.
But maybe there's a new one, or maybe it's an old one, whatever comes
Yeah,
to
yeah, yeah, yeah.
mind.
Let me think. Um, I really love the show. It's not on anymore, but I know Netflix has it too. I think you can stream all of the seasons at once for those of you who like to binge things. I really enjoy the show The Good Place. I enjoy it
Mm,
because it's hilarious for one thing, but it's
yes.
also like it's surprisingly deep for a sitcom. And there
Hmm.
are some really like fantastic spiritual themes that emerge. I feel like the actors all do an amazing job. The writing is hysterical. Um, but there's some really interesting themes that show up, and so that's one that that I feel comfortable recommending, also because I know it doesn't have a lot of the things that maybe people have sensitivities toward, like violence or extreme sexuality or whatever. So
Hmm.
that's what I would recommend.
Perfect. Well, thank you again, Delara. I have
Yeah.
immensely enjoyed our conversation, as
Mm.
I had no doubt I would.
Me too, Tiffany. Thank you for spending this time together with me and inviting me into this space with you.
Absolutely. Good stuff.